There is joy in all, in the hair I brush each morning, in the Cannon towel newly washed that I rub my body with each morning, the chapel of eggs I cook each morning, in the outcry from the kettle that heats my coffee each morning, and the spoon and the chair that cry, "Hello there, Anne," each morning, in the Godhead of the table that I set my silver plate cup upon each morning. All this is God, right here in my pea greenhouse each morning. And I mean, though often forget, to give thanks, to faint down by the kitchen table to a prayer of rejoicing as the holy birds at the kitchen window peck into their marriage of seeds. So while I think of it, let me paint a thank you on my palm for this God, this laughter in the morning, lest it go unspoken. The joy that isn't shared, I've heard, dies young. That meant so much to me. So we're going to have an opening song. So this monastery is a Christian monastery, but an ecumenical monastery. So there will be some words like Lord in some of the songs, but they're meant to be really melodic and really repetitive so that you can kind of sink into it. So you'll learn the words very quickly. And I'm going to share a video of that, of our opening song here.
Stephanie, did you optimize the sound? Because it's not coming in well.
No. Okay, how do I do that? Sorry.
Stop sharing
Okay.
and then start sharing again. But then before you click on the screen you want, on the bottom, there'll be something about
Oh,
optimizing
my
sound.
video clip. I'm so sorry, everyone. Let's try this again.
You're not muted, but we're not hearing you. We can't hear you, Stephanie.
And we've had that once or twice before with people, but I don't remember what the solution was.
Yeah, I wonder if she logged out and then come back in again.
Maybe
That
so.
should work.
It doesn't work?
It should work.
Is this better?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
There we go.
I'm so sorry, friends. I should have done like a tech rehearsal. I thought I'd be on top of this.
It's okay.
The video was kind of cheesy, but it had a lot of pictures from the monastery, and so that just sort of helps me settle in. Moving on with our service, I want to do a brief territorial acknowledgement that I don't know where you are. Where I am is land that has been home of the Dakota people for generations and tended to them as kin, and I am one of the people that is in the process of interrupting that relationship by living here. It also feels important for me, particularly where I live, to acknowledge that part of where I am is very close to where George Floyd was murdered and where Amir Locke was murdered, and that is part of where I come from now too. I had that awareness in a sort of international, national thing, and we were doing a land acknowledgement, and I was like, oh, that's part of where I am. And so that is very real to me as we acknowledge the territory that we're coming from. So if any of you have anything you would like to acknowledge or add to that, please jump in. Otherwise, we'll move on to the lighting of the chalice. I believe Chuck has the words for us, and Kathy's gonna lead it.
May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, to serve you, spirit of freedom, in the fullness of community.
Thanks, Kathy. And now we move on to joys and concerns. So this is just a time to share personal events happening in our lives. Jump on in if you have anything you want to add.
So this is really neither a joy nor a concern, but it's a memoriam for my mother's partner, George, who died on February 3rd. He was 103 years old. So he couldn't have lived a longer life, I don't think. I mean, he didn't, obviously, but he was a great guy, as he would say about other people. He's a great guy. And he was definitely a great guy.
Well, I'd like to say a piece of acknowledgement of the passing of my right canine tooth. Got extracted on Wednesday, and I now have a partial plate, which makes my speech pattern, particularly S's, different. And eating is weird, so I'm getting acclimated to that. It's a temporary thing until I can get a implant put in, probably by the end of the year or so. not a big deal, but it's an adjustment.
I have both a joy and a concern. The concern first is for people battling addiction, how difficult that is, and how many people are in that space. And then I'd like to also express a joy for the people who are working in rehab centers that are good ones. And addiction is kind of tromping on my family right now, so it's on my mind. But there are some wonderful people working in that profession, and my relatives are working hard to get their lives straight.
I have a joy. My ordination has been set for April 24th, and I'm very excited about it. We'll communicate with you kind of options for participating or streaming or whatever, but just can't really believe it's real. So yeah, I have a couple of boards exams between now and then, so it's not top of my mind, but it is fun to have a date to look forward to. Any other joys and concerns? All right. Well, for those left unspoken, we will light a final candle and say, we hold you in our hearts. Chuck, do you want to say a word about offering?
Yes, it is with gratitude that we give to this community for its ongoing worship and programs, and it is in gratitude that we accept those offerings. If you go to dakotauu.org, there's a donate tab, and otherwise you can send a check to Alice, and she can make her address available. If you don't know, you can communicate in the chat for that, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Chuck. So today, this week actually marks 10 years since I ran to France. And I think people have asked questions about it, and so I just thought this would be a good occasion for me to reflect a little bit on it and answer questions and share some music. And I'll show you some photos of little baby Steph 10 years ago towards the end of this. But so I just kind of want to talk about the movements of my time there. I went to the monastery because I had finished my MDiv, and I felt like I knew a lot about God, but I didn't have any kind of relationship or enthusiasm or spark left. And that sense of intimacy was what had drawn me into ministry in the first place. And somewhere over the course of my academic studies, I had let that go. I had sort of surrendered that and just gotten so deep into the intellectual side of things that I didn't have my heart in a place that felt true. During seminary, I talked myself out of believing in prayer, all these kinds of things. So what's a girl to do but go to a monastery, go pray 3 times a day. And I had sort of given myself an ultimatum, like, well, let's see if there's anything here, if this is still real, if there's anything sort of worth pursuing. And so that's what I did. I left all of my theological books behind. I brought the plainest Bible I could find and threw myself into this. And I remember arriving there and I cried for about the first week thinking, like, what have I gotten myself into? I'm I spent like 2 hours at this place. I have no idea how I even found out that long-term young adult volunteers were allowed. And I was like very overwhelmed and very miserable. And almost as soon as I got there, I wanted to leave because I was like, yeah, this isn't what I was expecting. The 2 pillars of the monastery, like any monastic community, is community and prayer. And I was like, oh, I think I wanted to be a hermit monk, not a monk living in community. The hardest part was not praying 3 times a day, but eating meals with 30 girls from all over the world 3 times a day. And just the little things of like, who thinks to wash the communal dishes at the end of the meal besides just your cup and bowl? Who has the, social graces not to take all of the vegetarian option when there's only like 2 of us that can eat this and you aren't one of them and you leave nothing for us because we weren't at the front of the line. It sounds so petty, but like that kind of stuff just drove me nuts. I was having such a hard time. And a lot of people in Europe go there sort of on a gap year or for a break. And I was in the house for girls that was like less than 6 months. If you were staying over 6 months, you had to do like 3 months in this house and then you could go into like the year-long house. But so I was there with people who were staying anywhere from sort of 1 to 6 months. And I was super judgmental and super frustrated, feeling like these people just didn't take it seriously. For them, it was just kind of this international Bible camp. They just wanted to like flirt with all these people from all over the world. And I was like, I'm trying to have a spiritual crisis here, and you're just like not getting a community sense out of this. So kind of from the start, I was trying to figure out how to leave. We didn't really have internet. There was 1 email address that was shared between all of the girls. So it was like hard to write home and be like, could you help me get another plane ticket? Like it was just, but I had my foot out the door and I sort of kept saying like, well, maybe 1 more week. Okay, maybe I can last 1 more week. But it was really tough. And I came to learn that community is one of the pillars for a reason. Like it's so easy to like be our own little hermit monks and think we've got our stuff worked out, until I think it was Ram Dass who said, like, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Like there's something about living with other people that will bring up your stuff. I was living in a room, 4 girls, no personal space. It was just like all people all the time. For this little introvert, that was really overwhelming and really, really good. I met some beautiful people and had some opportunities to look at my stuff by the people who were challenging. I stopped wanting to run away after my week in silence. So I sort of did run to the silence house, and I didn't have to talk to anybody for a week. I had my own room. Friends, this room like had its own garbage can. My bed didn't have anyone above me. I had a desk to myself. Like it was the lap of luxury. I think I even had my own sink. I just thought I was living big. And so I didn't like it for the creature comforts, but it was somewhere during the silence week that I stopped resisting. I had been in prayer and I'd felt like I was sitting against a closed door, sort of with my arms folded. And I had stopped knocking because I was like, no one's going to answer. I'm just biding my time, but I don't think that this is really going anywhere. But I said I'd show up and sit, so I'm going to show up and sit. And at the middle of every Taizé service is 10 minutes of silence. So there's lots of singing, there's a little bit of reading of texts, and then a big long silence. And yeah, I just felt like I was leaning up against a closed door. And somewhere in that silence week, I stopped crossing my arms and I just sort of started talking through the door in case anybody was on the other side. I just was like, maybe. And when we were in silence, we went to the 3 daily prayers at the monastery and then had our own time for meditation. So I was praying or in services or whatever, like upwards of 6 hours a day. And everything just softened and melted. And I just felt like the door was never locked. You didn't even have to knock. Like one little push would have just come right open, but you were so determined to be like so left out of this that you just sat out there and we let you. And then like the second that you were like, is anyone in there? And we're like, come on down. And I'll show you a photograph of a particular icon that really meant the world to me. And part of that turning point was during seminary, I had abandoned all personal pronouns for God, because at the time, this was the late 2000s. It was all he, him, and his. And I was like, no, I'm just not going to do that. And then I get to this monastery where of the long-term girls, I'm the only one that's a native English speaker, even though we use English all the time. And so everyone's using he and him for God because because that's really common. And they just didn't have sort of the linguistic acrobatics to work around it in another way in their second or third or fourth language. And I was like, if it really is a commitment to God's humanity and not God's masculinity, why couldn't I use she? And so singing all of the songs, reading all of the texts, every Bible verse, every time I found a he, I'd change it to a she. And that is another thing that just like cracked me in half, just blew everything wide open for me, because my experience of it at the time, this was 2000. Well, yeah, I guess this was 2012. But in seminary, like they, them pronouns was really uncommon. We didn't have a lot of like neutral gendered pronouns. And so I just stopped using them, and God felt very formal and very far away. And I realized with pronouns, I had missed an intimacy, a sense of connection, a sense of personality instead of this abstract thing. And so at the time, being able to have that way of pulling God closer with those pronouns made a huge difference. And this icon felt like, I'll show it to you in a minute, but these 3 women just sort of like leaving a side of the table open for me to like come and have coffee, and realizing all the women in my life that really might be and what intimacy with God might feel like. And I also just feel called to say, I don't think about God now, 10 years later, in the same way that I did at the time. And I think that that's for the best. Like we need to be growing, but just as I reflect on my time, those were turning points for sure. Then luckily they sent me to another little convent way tucked up in the Alps. I had a sister from the monastery whose job it was to sort of pick out my assignments, and she saw how much I loved Silence Week. So she asked if I wanted to go by myself to this convent in the Alps. And it was like straight out of The Sound of Music. This cathedral was built in like 1100 AD. It was all stone. It was so cold. Cloistered nuns. Nobody spoke a word of English. They all just wore their denim little dresses, and I helped clean the house and like serve the meals, and it was so delightful. And I never wanted to leave. And I came back to the main monastery, and it was time for me to go. And I was a little resistant, but I knew I had to leave because I had gotten comfortable. There was something familiar in me that I was like, oh yeah, I could just do this. And it sort of felt like dropping out of the world and into a spiritual practice, which sounds very appealing. And I think in other lives, I have definitely been monastic. But I learned a lot from Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away recently, and his whole movement was engaged Buddhism, to get out of the monastery. He felt when he was a young man in Vietnam, the Vietnam War is happening. He's saying, it is immoral for my brothers and I to sit inside and pray while there is war happening in our streets. So we need to, that might be a totally fine calling for some people, but for him, it just felt too removed. And he was like, I have to get out there. And so that was a big lesson to me too, in leaving the monastery. It was like, all right, I needed the time away to sort of be shut into that space. And I needed the time to take it out into the world. The text that meant the absolute most to me while I was there was the story of Mary seeing Jesus after the resurrection in the Gospel of John. And I've written a lot about it. I can share the links with you, but she sees him, recognizes that it's him, hugs him, and he's like, go, my brothers. And I always just felt so heartbroken for her. Like, I still like to imagine that he like hugged her for a while and they sat and had a chat and they had a little bit of a reunion moment before he was like, leave, you know? But I was like, that would feel so harsh to be like, go and tell. But I was like, no, once it dawns on you, like how alive and how close and how tender this love is, like that's the next thing, is to go and tell. And she did. That's what the text says, is that she did. And so that felt like sort of that last movement of the journey of like, I went because I didn't know what I was doing. I wanted to get out of there. I suddenly really liked it. And that was why I had to get out of there. In terms of what I've taken with me, I think there's just, I don't pray the way that I used to anymore. I don't think about God the way that I used to anymore. But the biggest takeaways for me were the experiences that I had with the divine, and knowing that I will never doubt the experiences that I had of the reality of God. Whatever words I come to use for that in the future, like those divine encounters were undeniably real. And so giving myself the time and the space to fight myself and my own ideas and get out of my own way and get way more creative were invaluable. So I'm going to show you some pictures. We're going to listen to another song. A word about the music. So traditional monasteries use these Gregorian chants, and Taizé was founded around the Second World War. These brothers started taking in refugees, basically. I'm not entirely sure if they were like hiding Jews or people running from the Nazis, but they were providing sanctuary. And then more and more of them started to do it. And then it kind of became this whole monastery. And then after the war, people started coming to visit. Anyways, they realized they had a lot of young people coming to visit and stay with them. And they realized like, all of our chants are really inaccessible. Like they're really confusing. They're really hard to follow. What if we made them a little bit shorter, a little bit more melodic, and just repeated the same thing over and over again, so that you didn't have to worry about keeping up with the words or what was happening next with the notes, but you could just sink into the experience of the song really quickly. And that is how they came up with the music that they're so famous for. So let me show you a couple pictures, and then we'll listen to a song, and then we'll have a little question and answer time afterwards. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen, but I don't need to optimize for video because it's just going to be some pictures. 1 second. Okay. You'd think that I would be good at all this tech stuff, but not quite yet. So these are all photos that I took. So this is a photo of the front of the church. These candles in the boxes and those orange flags, just like really signature beautiful Taizé. You saw some of this in the first video, the cross with the hearts on the ends. This is from the monastery I was sent to in the Alps. We were set way back in on this field up in the Alps. It was so beautiful. This was one of my proudest accomplishments. These are all dirty sheets. I really, really loved, it was a very sexist place, institutionalized gender nonsense, and I don't really blame them. But I was a very good cleaner and I was very tidy. And that meant that I got special work projects that I got to do alone. So I was alone and I was like, I will scrub any radiator. I will fold any sheets. Like, just give me some time to be by myself. So this was after we had like 6,000 visitors on the field. And so this is all dirty sheets that I had to like bundle up and make little sheet bricks out of. And this was not all of them, but this is the kind of thing that I genuinely got excited about, was my sheet bricks. So this is the icon that sort of changed everything for me when I was talking to these people. And I imagined them as women, just like sitting around having coffee and like inviting me in. And it was just really, really tender. So this icon in this chapel in the Silence House with this tulip meant a lot to me. So this is the convent that I was telling you about that's like settled way back. So again, like this is like outside of Grenoble, up this mountain. There were like Tour de France bikers like practicing on the mountain. Their thighs were like as big as my whole torso. Set all the way back in here, built, you know, 1,000 years ago. These people like did not want to be found. I don't know how they built this place 1,000 years ago, like this far tucked back, but it was gorgeous and so beautiful. And then all the old sisters are buried out in the front yard. And there was a gal who was, the oldest was 93 and the youngest was 33. And I still can't fathom committing my life to cloistered nuns, which means they don't really leave, and knowing that like I'm going to spend the rest of all of my days in this church and then just be buried in the front yard. And that's it. But it works for some people. This is a poster that was in the Silence House that says, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way," which is actually a Thich Nhat Hanh quote. And he has become a very, very important teacher to me. So that was kind of fun. Another picture of the icon. Baby Steph. This is me on one of the trails by our monastery in the Alps. It was so beautiful there. So Taizé is also really well known for these stained glass windows. And I think like the little people under their dresses is kind of creepy, but this is Elizabeth greeting Mary when they're both pregnant. And because I was living with 30 girls and we didn't talk to the boys much, and the power of the femininity and the divine meant so much to me, like the power that women have to recognize the spirit in one another and embrace the spirit in one another was a huge part of my time. And so this window meant a lot to me. This story meant a lot to me, of just women sharing the enthusiasm, the God within them. This is my other favorite one. I don't know who it was supposed to be or what it was supposed to be about, but it was just my favorite. We're set in like rural France, so everything's just really cute over there. This is me and my friends. Lynn is in the middle, and Sitska. I just given both of them a haircut, you know, because we're just like in the middle of nowhere. So we had a little barbershop day. This is me having baguette for breakfast every day. And in the Netherlands, they put chocolate sprinkles on bread and call it breakfast. And so what is in my right hand is a box of sprinkles. It's that big. You just coat the bread edge to edge with sprinkles, but it's the little things that you get excited about. So breakfast sprinkles were a hit. My friend Sitska, she was becoming a pastor in the Netherlands. This is my favorite monk. His name's Pierre-Yves. My last day at Taizé, I got kissed by a monk. He led this early morning chapel that I would go to. And I sat next to him, like on the other side of the little barriers in the chapel. And when he found out it was my last day, he gave me this big hug. And he gave me these big, wet French cheek kisses. And I was like, I got kissed by a monk. And he's like 1,000,000 years old. And I don't think he's there anymore. Like, I hope his spirit is resting in peace. But he was so incredible. And so I was like, can I get a picture with you? So, and then this is Sitska and my other friend, Katie. I think Katie has since become a nun. Sitska's thinking about it. We were kind of the older girls. Lynn and Antoinette were much younger, and these girls were like in their mid-20s like me. And this was Easter morning, and I think that's it. So I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna put on a song, and then we'll have some question and answer. Okay.
Stay with me, remain here with me, walk
So this is a time when you can ask me questions, or if I were going to ask you a question, my question would be like, what are those experiences that you have had of the divine that even years and years later have stuck with you as a moment of like, yep, that was real, and just like made that kind of impression on you? So if you have those moments, I'd love to hear about them. Or if you have other questions about my time, I'd love to answer them.
Yes, I have a question and a comment too. The question is those beautiful pieces with the colors and the shapes. How old are those?
The main monastery of Taizé only really started in like the 40s. So I think those are from like the 60s or 70s. They have a bunch of artists. Most of the brothers have some sort of art that they do, you know, when they aren't praying and stuff. Some of them are potters. This is a bowl from the monastery, actually, that they sell in their little shop to sort of support the monastery. So one artist was a stained glass artist, and he made, one of the brothers was a stained glass artist, and he made those for the church.
They're beautiful.
But they're fairly modern, yeah.
Yeah, my comment is when you started to talk about France, I thought about my about information that I read about when I was first introduced to the goddess. You know, the UU Church has the program Cakes for the Queen of Heaven, which I did, and I just loved it and got all immersed in talk about the pronoun, you know, the feminine, divine, and the goddess, and all that. For me, that was like just a huge awakening. So I think I was probably in my 40s, maybe something like that. But anyway, in France, in this one area of France, they claim to have Mary Magdalene's bones and a tomb that she's buried in. And so I thought about that when you mentioned France. That was just one story added to so many stories about women that I had never heard before. That was kind of fascinating.
Very cool. And I should add, I am drinking out of this bowl out of nostalgia because we didn't have cups. And so we had our coffee either out of these little blue plastic bowls. Two of my friends snuck some into my laundry or my suitcase. So I came home and I was like, what are these doing here? Because we didn't have cups. We just had blue plastic bowls. Or each of us that was going to be there for a long time, like bought a real bowl from the shop. And this was my coffee mug every morning. This was my water glass this was my cup. So I'm having my coffee out of a bowl this morning. Just, you know, in honor.
What's the program called that we're watching?
You know, I'm assuming that Stephanie, having grown up in Minnesota and how flat it is and how just extraordinary it would have been to experience the wilderness and the mountains and the ruggedness and the mystery of all that so yeah, I'm just kind of curious how that, you know, was it your first experience with altitude and stuff, mountains?
I had already moved around quite a bit. I'd already been in California and Alaska and Chicago and Iowa. And I had visited France. I had done a study abroad in Switzerland, which is how from Geneva we kind of did like a day trip over to Taizé. And that's kind of how I think I heard about it. I still don't know. But yeah, it was my first time, I mean, in the rural French countryside for most of it, and then in the Alps, up those very windy roads. The thing that I didn't realize I missed so much is I went obviously kind of right towards the end of winter, but it still felt very wintry. And as things started to thaw out, I remember one day I heard a stream trickling. And I'm just going to pause there and say part of the reason the poem that I read at the start of the service was so moving to me is because when my life was so simplified and so stripped down, it would be little things like having a nice towel to dry your hands with instead of just paper towels, or like having a nice cup instead of a plastic bowl. So one day I was really tuned in and I heard this stream starting to trickle by. It was warm enough that things were starting to melt. And I was like, water, that's what I've been missing. I can live a lot of places, but it's always like on the ocean or by a river or on a lake. And I just was like, ooh, I do love a mountain, but like, I need a river, I need a lake. Like that's what has been missing, like foreign for me geographically, was just a place that didn't have bodies of water. And then of course in the Alps, we are right by that giant river. So I could see that if I hiked to the end of that huge sort of field expanse, because that, I think I took a picture like looking back at the convent, but like out here, and then it just dropped and there was like that huge river and the Alps and towns below. So being without a large body of water was very foreign to me, but it was really beautiful. Yeah, I can't complain at all.
I really liked your comment about how things were getting too comfortable for you and then you knew it was time to leave. So what, you've been gone for there 10 years. Tell me about some of the other levels of discomfort that have helped you grow in the last 10 years.
Do you have 10 years? No.
The bullet points.
Yeah. I mean, after that experience, I, became an ELCA pastor, and that was one of the uncomfortable things that I grew from. I think I would definitely say that wasn't a choice of, oh, I should keep moving because this is too easy. But that sitting through that discomfort definitely helped me grow. I've had that in other ways, not spiritually, but professionally. I was in a job where I was just bored out of my mind, and I thought that it was going to be like my total dream job. And so I was like, all right, I got to do something else. Like, what am I going to do? And so I went to Cairo school. So, yeah, I think for me, the song that I played after the message of stay with me, remain here with me, watch and pray, was really, really meaningful to me, because it's sort of knowing like when sitting through that discomfort is the calling, and when it's time to go, and just sort of being on the lookout for like staying at that growing edge. And the difference between like running away and moving forward is a line that I didn't have a great sense of, but I kept flirting with, I would say, all through my 20s.
One thing that struck me, and maybe you can speak to the kind of the pros or the cons of not knowing the language of things. I have a record album of choir doing, the name of the record album is called Echoes from a 16th Century Cathedral. And so I thought of that music because it's, it's very kind of monastic sounding or whatever. It's all in Latin, and I know a few of the words mean, but I'd rather not, because it's deeply spiritual to me, just the sound of it. And if I know the lyrics, that would kind of be like, well, okay, now I got to analyze. No, I don't agree with the theology, all of that. So
it's really
yeah,
interesting at Taizé. Excuse me, Disco, I'm trying to talk to these lovely people. I picked out songs to sing in English. Most of the songs were available in multiple languages, and so during a given service we'd be singing in multiple languages, some of which I was terrible at. Like Polish has all these consonants that I can't tell apart, and so I would be trying, or if there were a lot of Germans there that week, we'd sing a lot of German songs. But and a lot of the readings were in French and English. We spoke English sort of around just because it was the most common language, but I was often singing songs in foreign languages, Russian or Latin or German or French or Spanish. And it was sort of nice to just fall into the spirit of it and to know that like, this is home to someone else, you know, and to sort of drop into it for them. I would say the moment that the language moment that was the most profound for me was Easter. We had 6,000 people there. They did not all fit in the church. A lot were out sort of on the field where it was being projected via speaker. And in all my Lutheran church years, you know, you said he is risen indeed, like 500 times on Easter Sunday, you know, and it was this big service and the head brother hadn't said it once. And I was like, what is going on? What kind of Easter is this? The last thing, the service ended with him saying it. He said it first in French, and most people responded in French. He said it in English, and just about everybody said it in English. And then they had gone through and figured out the native language of every single person visiting. And he said it in every single language that was represented. And you could hear when he said it in German, like this pod of German people like screamed it like, yeah, that's us. And then I had a couple of friends who were long-term volunteers from a country in Africa that I can't remember the name of. It's been a really long time, I'm sorry. And he said it in their native tongue, and there were two of them that like screamed it at the top of their lungs, because it was like, this pronouncement is even for me, even, you know, and as it got smaller and smaller, it was just like, and I was just weeping. It was so profound to hear everyone be sort of seen and recognized in that way, and to hear like the multiplicity of the beauty of it, of like, I don't even know what language this is, but like, it's for you, and that is how this works, is like, yeah, this love will come and find you and be recognizable to you. So that was some of how I experienced that, but I'm glad you have those records and can just kind of sink into the feeling of it too.
That sounds like a similar situation when a rock concert, when they mention the name of the city they're in, the crowd goes nuts. It's a really easy way to get the crowd, especially if you can work it into a song, you know, and change the words of the song to the city. Yeah, it's golden.
Yeah, it was just really cool to hear the common languages that most people could respond to, and then as it got smaller and smaller, realizing like, oh, they are doing this, even if there are just 2 people out of the 6,000, like they get their own refrain. So it was really beautiful. When people ask me to talk about Taizé, is this what you were hoping for? I don't know. I'm suddenly very self-conscious. Like, am I just down like memory lane having fun by myself? Like, does this mean anything to anybody? Or am I just like, oh, I got to drink out of a bowl and sing some songs?
I loved it, and I'm really appreciative that you shared this. So thank you.
I do actually have like a whole blog about it. From when I got back, I spent a year sort of unpacking my experiences, partly for my own self, partly because this is a really famous monastery, and before I went there, I couldn't find out a lot about it. And so I was like, I want to share my experiences with people. And you can, if you want to go to France, I mean, I don't know what the COVID stuff is right now, but anybody can come and spend a week there. And that's how most people experience the monastery, staying for a week. And I stayed for longer than that. I was there for a couple months, but yeah, part of it was like, I just want people to be able to see what that slice of life was like. And so, yeah, I've written lots about it. But.
Wait, maybe I missed this at the beginning, but what was your impetus for going there? I mean, in the 20s, what I've seen is most young kids aren't thinking about spirituality very deeply at that point in your life. And I mean, most people wouldn't have the opportunity that you had, but what was your...
I had been through seminary, and I had sort of stopped, I don't want to say stop believing in God. The way I put it to myself at the time was like, I knew a lot about God and a lot of what I thought about God, of like, oh, I can agree with this, I will disagree with that, I can argue for this kind of theology, but there wasn't any kind of a like animating sense to it. There was nothing like heartfelt about it. And so I was like, that's what brought me down this path in the first place, was just a really yeah, animating sense of connection and like calling in the world. And I don't know where it went or if it's real, but I'm going to go find out. So I went and did that, but then was dismayed by a lot of the 18, 19-year-olds that I was there with who were taking a gap year, just kind of figuring it out, and like weren't really there super spiritually minded, you know, and I like, they could have been doing a lot of other things and I should have given them a little bit of credit of like, they chose to come to a monastery, like blah, blah, blah. But I had a lot of unspoken expectations that I wanted it to be this like very austere spiritual experience instead of like cutting my friend's hair and like making a lot of friendship bracelets, you know, which was also really important.
How much interaction did you have with the monks?
Yeah, so there are like male brothers that run the monastery, and then there are female sisters that are sort of adjacent and sort of help the monastery run, but they have their own house and order. And so on the women's side, it was very binary. It was very masculine, feminine. It was very divided. So on the women's side, we worked with the sisters a lot. They gave us our work assignments. They monitored our work. And it was all cleaning and dishes and things like that. The boys had a lot more interaction with the brothers. The brothers would join them for dinner every now and then. The boys had a lot of like privileges and supplies that we didn't. And but that's also because the brothers were basically always trying to recruit the boys to join. So they were kind of like, here, you can have wine with dinner. Here, you can have like real butter, or like, we'll give you shampoo. And I know that sounds so minimal, but like the boys had it so much better than we did because they were like, you know, trying to be recruited. We would have Bible study just as the long-term young adult volunteers, are called permanents. So the volunteers would have Bible study with one or two of the brothers every week or twice a week. So we did get to talk to them. And there were certain things that they would lead, like one of them would lead song practice. You could learn the songs in the afternoon. And so there were certain ones we interacted with more than others, but in general, we had a lot more contact with the nuns. And my contact sister was the one who was kind of set out to look out for me. And she and I would meet once or twice a week just to chat about how things were going, what questions I had, and how I was doing. And so we were really looked after. And a lot of the brothers felt very just kind of involved in other things. So that's why it was really cool to get to know Pierre Yves through his like morning chapel service. So I get up early to go to church before I went to church for the day. You know, little dork that I was, but I got kissed by a monk, so it all worked out well. But he was really sweet. And then it was really cool because one of my professors at seminary had been a monk at Taizé, which is not something you find very often. His wife had been a sister, and they fell madly in love and left Taizé and had a couple of kids. And it was so fun visiting him when I got back. I just wanted to meet with him, and like being around him, I just felt he had that kind of aura about him, that monastic aura, even though he was like living in the world now, of just like, oh, I feel like I'm back in that place. Like that tone is still set. He did a lot of their music, actually. He was a liturgist for them. And so that was really fun to sort of encounter him outside of that place and get to know a lot about the behind the scenes and what the brothers were like from him, because he was friends with all of them. You know, he had been there. They don't go anywhere. He had known all those guys. He had known Pierre Yves. He had, and then I read a couple of the books that the brothers had written. Pierre Yves had written a book. The head brother had written a book or two. And so I would kind of read through those as a way to sort of stay in touch afterwards as well.
Since we want to be considerate of time,
Yes.
we should probably close, but I was wondering if, would you be able to send Chuck the link to your blog, and then we could put it out in the MailChimp?
Yeah, and I'll put it in the chat right now. Oh, where did you go? I'll put it in the chat right now. I'm so sorry, I didn't even look at the time. Okay. I'm gonna put this in the chat. And then I'm gonna put, oh, whoops. And then I'm gonna put a couple of the songs. So this is the song that I was going to close with that I won't, that you can just watch on your own time if you want to. This was the song that I really took with me as I was leaving, that sort of gave me a lot of confidence as I was going out. And here's one of the songs from earlier. And all of these are linked on my blog. That's how I found it. I was like, oh, I like did a good job of tagging them. I'm like, here's music, here's photos, here's excerpts from my journal, here's whatever. So yeah, pictures and stuff like that. So anyways, hope that's a good way around. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I'm sorry I got lost down memory lane and in France. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was great.
Yeah.